Soon as I do. Yeah, there we go. The chat will be open if you want to ask questions in the chat throughout. Lynn, our presenter, is going to talk for about 30 minutes, and then that leaves us 30 minutes at the end to be able to discuss and ask questions and talk with each other. So please feel free to use the chat as needed. My name's Brittany Sandifer, for those of you who don't know me, and I'm very happy to be here with you tonight. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Lynn and then hand it off to her. So Lynn Edmonds, thank you for joining us tonight. She is the Outreach Director for Public Schools First NC, and she represents District 5 on the Wake County Board of Education here in North Carolina. She's worked in public education advocacy for 20 years, first as a volunteer before joining Public Schools First NC in 2013. She graduated with an associate's from Peace College, now William Peace University, and has served on multiple PTA and civic boards, including her current at-large position on the Wake County Board of Library Commissioners. In 2022, she was elected to the Wake County Board of Education, serving North Carolina's largest school district. As a native North Carolinian, she and her husband attended and graduated from Durham Public Schools, and they have 2 children who both graduated from Wake County Public Schools. So we're very grateful to have you here tonight, Lynn, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Brittany, for the invitation. This is my favorite part of this job as outreach director. I really love being in community with others and sharing information and doing presentations. I have a pretty casual style, so I don't mind pausing rather than waiting till the end. If we want to, I'll find a place to pause, maybe for questions. I find that's just a little more dynamic and engaging for you all, and certainly we have time for questions at the end. I'm not able to watch chat. I can do things and chew gum at the same time, but watching chat while I'm trying to keep up with my notes and the slides is not one of them. So Brittany, I'll ask you to, if you'll take notes of questions as they pop up in the chat, I'll ask you to monitor that. I want to start by telling you, if you're not familiar with Public Schools First NC, I want to tell you about who we are and what we do. We are a statewide advocacy group, a grassroots advocacy organization. We are statewide and nonpartisan. We follow education policy at the state level, and we work to educate North Carolina citizens about what's going on at the state level with regard to public education. We are a 501c3, so that means that we are nonpartisan, so we're not allowed to endorse candidates. However, what we are allowed to do and what we take full advantage of is taking strong positions on issues, and that we do not shy away from that, and that will be very evident as we move through this evening. And I feel that that sets us apart from other public education news groups that you will see come across your radar that report on education news, but they don't necessarily take strong positions on issues. And again, I think that's what sets Public Schools First NC apart. Oh, now we don't want to advance. All right, hang on, let's see. There we go. So to center us in this conversation this evening, I've got this slide that says public schools are a public good. And that is one of our core beliefs. It describes who we are, it describes what we're about and why we do the work that we do. We believe in one unified, high quality, free, accessible to all public education system instead of the fractured system that we have now in North Carolina, which involves the traditional public school system and charter schools and unaccountable private voucher schools. Just a brief for anybody that doesn't know how the General Assembly works, and believe me, this is not going to encompass all of that, but just a little bit of a North Carolina General Assembly 101, if you will, and I do mean a very micro glance. The House and Senate terms are only 2-year terms, and that means for all intents and purposes that every member of the General Assembly is potentially up for re-election every 2 years. Some seats never get contested because they're either heavily Republican or heavily Democratic. We right now are in what's called the long session, and that is when lawmakers set a 2-year state budget. We do, at Public Schools First NC, we do whole programs at this length or even longer just on the budget. I'm going to give you just a snippet of the House budget tonight because I was invited to give a legislative update. So we're going to talk about some legislation and some bills that are coming through. But just to let us know where we are in the long session. That's when they set a 2-year budget. And the short session is in the even numbered years. May 4th is what's called crossover, or at least that's the date this year. Crossover is with regard to bills that don't involve the budget or aren't part of appropriations. They have to pass the House or the Senate by this date to be considered or passed in the current long session or even in the 2024 short session. So this is part of the reason with this date fast approaching, that's why we're seeing a lot of activity right now. Just as an illustration of that, just last week, 217 new bills were filed, and that's a lot for 1 week. And those were all in addition to anything that's been filed since January. So like we're in the, I don't know what, I didn't look at it today, but we're in like the 800s, so a lot of bills are being filed and being filed quickly, especially ahead of that May 4th deadline. So let's talk a little bit about the House budget. We do not have the Senate's budget yet. That's expected very soon. And Governor Cooper did release a budget, but there's really no need to go into a deep dive about what was in the Cooper's budget, because it really is up to the House and the Senate to make that final determination and to set that state budget. Plus, we are going to try to end at 9 p.m. And so we are just not going to involve ourselves with what was in Governor Cooper's budget. So in the House budget, and let me pause here and say, I really am, forgive me, but I'm going to fire hose all of you with a lot of information. So these are the highlights of the things in the House budget that we think you need to know about. It is not all encompassing by any means. But in the House budget, we have some things including raising the base teacher pay from $37,000 to $38,500. North Carolina ranks about 35th in the U.S. in teacher pay, and that's just the base salary. It doesn't include local supplements. There is $170 million for local supplements for most of North Carolina counties. So what this is with regard to that supplement, it is the state giving county governments funds to provide local supplements for teacher pay or other school funding needs. And they started this fund with the last state budget, but they excluded North Carolina's 5 largest counties. So those 5 are Wake, Durham, Mecklenburg, Buncombe, and Guilford. And those 5 counties are still excluded in the House budget for this $170 million. So it's for most other North Carolina counties, but not the 5 wealthiest. It restores master's pay for all qualifying teachers and other licensed school staff, such as school counselors. That's a good thing. There is paid parental leave. This would be offered to school employees who have been employed for at least 1 year, and it's for 8 weeks for those that actually give birth. If someone adopts a child or becomes a foster parent, it's 4 weeks of paid parental leave. But still a good thing, something that we support. There is a 4.25% pay increase for all school support staff or non-certified staff, and an average of 9.5% increase for bus drivers. So not every bus driver would see 9.5, but that's the average statewide. And that just aims to help with our bus driver shortage. But all hourly pay based or hourly pay school support staff would see some increase.
And Lynn, if we get that increase to 38.5, will we still be ranked at 35th in teacher pay?
That's a great question. It's not going to move the needle very much. So maybe we'll get to, 33, 32. I didn't look to where it would put us. But it's not going to move the needle drastically. No. And that's a great question. So continuing with the House budget, posting class material. This may not be tied to a dollar amount, but posting class materials for parental review is part of the House budget. And that is a provision that mandates school districts and charter schools to document all course materials ahead of the academic year. And this is going to include textbooks, optional books, videos, digital materials, and more. And schools would be required to make these lists of materials available to the public for anyone to review. If the materials are not digital, for and they're not available online, the school still has to create a process for people to review them by some mechanism. So this is what's known as a budget provision. So it may not be tied to funding, but they can throw all kinds of things, mandates, into a budget. It's important that you note that I said that it applies to charter schools too. Oftentimes when they do these kinds of things, charter schools are exempt, but not in this case. There are caps, 4th and 5th grade classes. And I will pause in a minute for other questions. This K3 class, this is like K3 class size chaos all over again. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the, when several years ago, the legislature reduced class sizes in K3, but they didn't provide funding to go along with that. And it was very difficult for a lot of districts to accommodate that legislation because there wasn't funding to help them implement it. And we want to be very clear, Public Schools First NC, we are not saying that there's anything wrong with smaller class sizes. We think, we are in support of smaller class sizes. They're great. That's a good intention, right? They're exactly what we need to help students to be more successful, to give them better instruction, that one-on-one attention that will help them be more successful. The problem here is it's not adequately funded to be implemented. And there is some funding in this 4th and 5th grade class size reduction for instructional assistants or teaching assistants, but it's not clear whether or not districts will receive the extra funding needed for the teachers that will be required, the additional teachers or the additional classroom space. That's not clear. So it's not that smaller class sizes are a problem. We just need the funding to make it work in practicality, right? To actually implement it. Teaching fellows, the House budget expands eligibility to students, college students that are seeking an education degree in any content area. So I forget what year it was. It's been 5, 6 or more years ago, maybe even longer. The Teaching Fellows program was abolished and then reinstated. When it was reinstated, though, it was geared toward or students going into STEM fields or special education get to enroll in the Teaching Fellow or get, to take advantage of this program. this House provision opens it up to any college student going into any content area or focus in education. And that's also a good thing in our view. So I think this is a good pause. I want to talk about some stuff about school vouchers. Do we want to take a minute and ask questions about anything I've said so far?
I have a quick question about public schools' views on charter schools. Is public schools first unilaterally against all charter schools, or just like maybe you'd support them if they offered a free bus and a free lunch, or just against them altogether?
I wouldn't say we're against them altogether. We have a lot of problems with them, and we're very vocal about that. And it's not just that you offer lunch and transportation. We are opposed to for-profit charter schools.
Yes.
And your question is so timely because just last week on the wait, where are we? I'm looking at my calendar across the room. I think it was on the 20th. We did a webinar specifically about the impact of charter schools on local districts. And we have a YouTube channel. And in that webinar, we take a very deep dive just on charter schools and a little bit on vouchers because a bill was introduced last week on voucher schools that is pretty concerning. But it was mostly on charter schools and our views on that. So I can
find that on YouTube.
Yep.
Awesome.
And I'm gonna, yeah. But great question. And we also believe, I'll just add to that, that we believe we want the cap reinstated on charter schools. And we also believe that they should be allowed to be governed by locally elected school boards.
Makes sense. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
May I ask if the budget provision about teachers that having to post materials online, there's that's something like that is in the bill for the Parents' Bill of Rights. And so is that kind of like a double whammy that even if that bill doesn't pass and it's in the budget, then that would have to happen anyway? Is that right?
Absolutely. Now it is, I do want to be clear that the House budget is all we have right now, and it has been passed along to the Senate, and they'll hash things out. So it could change. It could change. But it's just, that is something that is in the current House budget proposal, and it could stay there. And it could be, to your point, the Parent Bill of Rights, whether or not it passes, if provision stays in the House budget and the Senate decides to keep it, in conjunction with the budget that they merge and agree to, then it can happen anyway. Does that make sense?
And so just again, there's so many, and I'm sure you're going to explain later, and this being one of them that, has a lot of ambiguity to it, in terms of like, certainly our district already has a system in place and has for years that if parents want to review something, that there's a process for them to do so. So even for districts, which probably all of them have something like that in place, this makes every teacher in every subject area have to display everything, even if it's not been requested. Is that right?
Yes, even if it's not been requested, but the language that, as I understand it, it requires the school districts to manage it.
Because I think that, like just thinking about like a teacher that has, countless materials and resources,
right,
he or she uses, in a given day, a good teacher like adds things throughout the year. And so this would make all of that incredibly difficult.
Correct. But it does say, I believe in the language, in advance of the academic year. So I don't know, I don't want to get in the weeds. I don't know how that would work if a teacher, like, I don't know if a teacher that added something mid-year would have to comply, if that makes sense. I just don't know.
Or got hired mid-year.
Exactly. So I don't know how that would work, but that's a great question. Yeah. All right, let me move on. I'm watching the time too. So I want to talk about vouchers, and we are going to spend a little bit of time on this. you see this cartoon, this is how we feel about vouchers. We're, we are opposed to public money going to private school vouchers. This is one of our very strong positions. We believe that public dollars belong in the public goods and services, and certainly public education dollars belong in public schools, not private schools. So House Bill 823, it's the same thing as Senate Bill 406, which is why I put that in parentheses up there in the header. It blows the roof off of voucher school spending. What is really, really important, just from a visual standpoint and like the takeaway, you can honestly, I want you to digest what's on the right-hand side, all that text. But I want you to focus on that blue line. Do you see that spike, at the end of 2023 going into the 23-24 school year? That blue line is the 2022 Appropriations Act. So they just did that last year in 2022. That blue line shows you how much they increased the funding for private school vouchers last year in the short session. The red line that you see is what House Bill 823 does. I mean, it just completely blows the roof off of the funding. And what's particularly egregious to us as an organization is that while we believe that our traditional public schools are chronically underfunded, vouchers are exponentially overfunded. And what we mean by that is that most children in North Carolina do attend our traditional public schools, not private schools. And the voucher money that is currently available has a surplus, meaning that there is money sitting there that is going unused, and that doesn't revert back to the public school system or public education. It is just sitting there, and yet they continue to put more and more and more into that pot. And we believe that that's wrong. So included in House Bill 823, there is a sliding scale now of how much money a family would get for a voucher. So for example, if you make more than $111,000 a year, you get 90% of the voucher amount. If you make more than $246,000, you still get access. I'm skipping down to the bottom. You still get access to 45% of the voucher amount. And when we say voucher amount, this legislation ties the value of the voucher to our state per pupil expenditure, which is about $6,000. And we view this as a major problem because folks in the upper income bracket, they need money for a voucher. It's almost like getting a tax rebate. Like they can afford to send their children to private school anyway. They don't need taxpayer money to cover that cost. And so we don't believe that they should have access to it at all, but this is what House Bill 823 does. It's hard for me not to stay just right there on that topic.
Lynn, there's a question about whether or not they get money from local funds like charters.
That is in another slide.
Okay, thanks.
So the voucher recipients do not yet, but charter schools do, and that's coming up. So the House budget also removes all accountability, which there's hardly any, and I'll show you what I mean by that in just a second. But for how these tax dollars are used, voucher schools are already permitted to give whatever test they want to administer to gauge student achievement, student growth, and they no longer have to submit any of that data to any state authority. And that's what you see here. So there was very little oversight to start with, which you'll see in a second, but this makes it even worse, that they no longer have to report any amount of data whatsoever to any state authority to show taxpayers how these students are achieving, whether or not they're showing growth. All of that is removed in the House budget. Well, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this one. It just shows how, in addition to expanding the amount they're putting in the overall voucher pot, they have also expanded eligibility almost every budget cycle. So, you know, when they were first started they were started before 2015, there was a lawsuit. Public education advocates lost the lawsuit. Vouchers were allowed to move forward, but they were sold to the public as a way for children from low-income households to escape their failing schools. That is no longer the case. They've raised that ceiling, that income ceiling, that eligibility every year, in addition to raising the amount of the voucher amount. Talking about accountability, so this is the Children's Law Clinic at Duke Law School did a study in May of 2020. And with regard to accountability, they found that North Carolina has one of the weakest private school oversight systems in the country. So of all the states that have private school vouchers, and not all of them do, but of all the states that have private school vouchers, North Carolina has one of the worst oversight systems. Says under state law, private schools are permitted to make their own decisions regarding curriculum, graduation requirements, teacher qualifications, number of hours and days of operation. And for the most part, you know, they get to choose their own testing, and no accreditation is required of these schools. And this is from the same report. So this just kind of shows you visually that what other states that allow private school vouchers, at least they require some accountability, whether it's accreditation or regulated curriculum, certified teachers, a testing program, regulated days, hours, etc. That far right column shows you North Carolina requires none of that. None of that. And again, that's from that same report from May of 2020. And I can send that link to you to that report with other stuff that I'll send you, you know, tomorrow or whenever I'll share these slides with you too. I want to move on to charter schools just so we keep time for questions, but Emily, this will answer some of your questions too. This is how, again, it kind of depicts how we feel about charter schools. I'll just ask you to keep in mind that our core belief is that we support one unified system of free, accessible to all, high quality public education system versus this fractured system that we have now. We believe in a public education system that doesn't require lotteries and, you know, whether or not you're achieving a certain level in math, you know, etc. And I mentioned the webinar that we did last week, and you know, I'll send that link as well. So these are some charter school bills that have been recently filed. I'm going to go through these really quickly. House Bill 149 about the remote and virtual charter. This grants another year to we have two existing virtual charter schools. That is not the same thing as the North Carolina virtual public school, which is operated out of DPI. That's a different thing. We have two online virtual charter schools. And so this HB 149 grants another year to operate as well. And they've been consistently low performing. It also increases their enrollment caps. It also allows any brick and mortar charter school to start or offer a virtual option or open a virtual academy. So your local brick and mortar charter school, in addition to the two that the state has, can open their own, you know, virtual academy or what have you. And all part of House Bill 149, and this is one of those things, I'm not savvy enough to talk about this a whole lot, but sometimes things are tied to a bill that are unrelated to the title or unrelated to the other content. This adds a requirement that the president of the North Carolina Community College System will be confirmed by the legislature. So that's that college president confirmation piece that you see in the bill title. House Bill 618, Charter School Review Board. This limits the State Board of Education's role in approving or renewing new charter schools. It basically makes it, or charter schools in general, it basically makes it easier for new charters to get approved and further limits accountability. Senate Bill 222, Guidelines for Approving Charters, requires the State Board of Education to approve any charter school application that meets the qualifications that are set out in this bill. Senate Bill 222, and they're pretty minimal. Senate Bill 230, approve American Leadership Academy. The State Board of Education, this is specific to one charter school that has been denied twice by the State Board of Education. It's in Monroe in Union County, and this requires that charter school get approved. Senate Bill 634, this one we actually approve of because it caps the number of charter schools in the state at 225. So the original cap was a cap of 100, which we actually support reinstating that cap, but this at least caps it going forward at 225, and we have 206 right now.
Why does the Senate want to cap charter schools? I thought their whole mission was to dismantle public education and make a bunch of charter and private schools without.
I don't know who the bill sponsors are. I wouldn't say that the whole Senate, is in favor of it. It may not go anywhere. Like I said, I don't have in front of me who the bill sponsors were, but somebody in the Senate, so it's a Senate bill. This one I do want to focus on, House Bill 219, because this one, definitely has some traction and is very concerning. It's known as the Charter Omnibus Bill. This bill alone, if none of the other stuff, if all the other stuff goes away, this bill alone has a very great impact on our local school districts and their funding. Charter schools with this bill would have access to reimbursement, sales tax revenues, sales tax refunds, federal dollars provided directly to the local school districts and a local district's fund balance. Charter schools already have access to most of these categories, and when a charter school applies for these or say get sales tax revenues, they don't share what they receive in that category. They keep 100% of that money. What this bill does is it requires the public school district to share whatever they receive with charter schools. And we view that as like double dipping. And they can apply for these funds on their own, but they're not required to share any of that with the public school unit. It would also prohibit the State Board of Education from considering the impact on the local school district when they approve or review, new charters. It allows county governments, your county commissioners, to provide facility funding, which does not happen right now. And it limits enrollment growth only to low performing charters. So this is more of just a FYI slide. I know it only goes to 2021. We have 206. I can't see my screen. Yeah, 206 charters in North Carolina right now, not 204. I just thought it was important. You can see where that cap was lifted, where it was at 100, and then you see where it went after cap was lifted and how quickly charters have grown across the state. This kind of shows the same data, and I'm sorry I don't have this map. We can't find it for 2023. But it just shows, the proliferation and the growth of charter schools. It shows the percentage of public school students in charter schools from 2012 compared to 2020. I know that that key for the colors is hard to read. So I'll just say that the white is less than 1% of the public school students attending charters for that county. The bright yellow is 1% to 3.9%. The dark yellow is 4 to 7.9%. The orange is 8 to 11.9%. And then that dark red is 12 to 16%. And I want somebody who's got this capability to update this for 2023. But you get, the point is still made since the cap was lifted.
Belle shared in the chat that it's Senator Waddell, a Democrat from Greensboro, that pushed the cap bill forward, or sponsored the cap bill.
Thank you. Other bills of concern, these are not related necessarily to vouchers or charters. These are just other bills that we're concerned about. I was first invited to speak with you all about Senate Bill 49, which is the Parents' Bill of Rights. But our role as, public education advocates and a advocacy organization is we really want to try to call attention to bills that have a major impact on public education that may not get the media attention of things like the Parents' Bill of Rights. They may not get the social media traction that something like the Parents' Bill of Rights gets. And so that's why I'm bringing all of this to you. We know which ones will move forward and which ones won't. And there's still, we're in the long session. We expect them to be in session for several more months. So a lot could change, but we think it's really important that all public education advocates have these things on their radar. And so these are things that bubble to the top for us. House Bill 793, public school open enrollment. As a school board member, this will make my, keep me up at night. It would allow students within the school district to enroll in any school in the district, even if it's not in their current assignment area or their current assignment zone. House Bill 800, public school part-time enrollment. In our view, this allows voucher students to have their cake and eat it too, because it would allow private school, homeschool, charter students to enroll in any specific course or class or program or service that is offered in the public school, in the public school district. House Bill 188, standards of student conduct. This makes it easier for principals to suspend students. It kind of unwinds some progress that had been made in recent years aimed at protecting students and promoting equity in discipline practices. And this bill takes us backwards. Marcia Morey of Durham County, she's one of the Durham County House members. She's been very vocal in her opposition to this bill because she was a former judge and has a really rich understanding of the school to prison pipeline. So I encourage you, if you want to know more about this, the HB 188, to look up her and her comments on that bill. There's been some media attention on that one. Senate Bill 645, add homeschools to opportunity scholarships. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. It gives homeschools students access to the voucher money. House Bill 756, Standards Advisory Commission. This one establishes a standard course of study advisory commission that would involve stakeholders in establishing the state standard course of study that we currently use, required to be used by all school districts in the state. And currently the Department of Public Instruction, or DPI, sets those standards and they get approved by the State Board of Education. But this would loop in stakeholders to you know, potentially with little to no experience in K-12 education or teaching or child development or pedagogy. House Bill 187, Equality in Education. This is our anti-CRT bill. And, you know, we can debate, you know, about CRT and what that means and what it doesn't mean, but this is like our version of North Carolina's version of that. It limits what can be taught with regard to U.S. history. We spotlighted this bill in our March 18th newsletter. I'll talk to you about our newsletters in a second, but do know, like I said at the start, I've given you a ton of information. Please know that we do take deeper dives in each of these things in our newsletters, social media. You know, we have a lot of commentary surrounding these things. I was just trying to give you a lot of information that was suitable for an hour time frame. I'm wrapping up, by the way, just so you know, we're getting toward the end. I shared this slide. I don't care what the topic is, what the focus is. I bring this in front of every group that I present to. This matters. North Carolina's tax rate has been phased out as of last year's budget. In 2013, it was at 6.9%. And this is our corporate tax rate. So these are tax rates that would be paid by Apple, Google, Fuji, these big corporations that are new to North Carolina or existing in North Carolina, not your personal income tax rate, the corporate tax rate paid by businesses. It was at 6.9% in 2013. And in 2013, we were not an outlier. We weren't the highest in the country. We weren't the highest in the Southeast. It wasn't a crazy percentage rate. But every budget cycle since 2013, it got lowered and lowered and lowered until in 2020, it was at 2.5%. And at that time, 2.5% was the lowest in the United States, and even lower than our neighbors in Virginia, South Carolina, you know, our neighboring states. In last year's budget, they took it to 0. So that's already been approved. That's done. It has happened. It has passed. So by 2025, our corporate tax rate will be 0. And that means that corporations who benefit from us having a strong public education system in North Carolina are not paying their share to invest in our public schools or other public goods and services. So I think that's important. I don't care what the topic is. I think this matters for state budget conversations. So now that I've, you know, brought you such good news from the public education front, what can you do? Contact your lawmakers. That's what our options are right this minute. Join groups, continue your advocacy, but contact your lawmakers is the most impactful thing you can do. There's a tool on the General Assembly's website if you don't know who your House and Senate members are. It's tiny on the top right-hand side of the homepage, but it says, find my representative or something like that. Find your representative, find your lawmaker. That's the link right there. And then you can also call this main number. And if you do know who your House member is, or even if you don't, I'm sure they would look it up for you. If you tell them, you know, your address, and they'll connect you to your person. If you ever call, you will likely get the legislative assistant. That's normal. It doesn't mean the lawmaker's avoiding you. They're busy. But their job, the legislative assistant's job, is to receive your comments and receive your input and record that and convey it. And I think most of them do that, you know, whether or not we align with their values. I think those legislative assistants do that well and they're diligent. So don't be shy about talking to the legislative assistant if you don't get through. And then we do have a petition page on our website. You can look there. We have various petitions about various things. And then where's my vote slide? There it is. That's the other thing you can do. So All right, we're going to pause for questions. After the questions, I have 2 more slides, one about an event and one to give you all of our social media and all of that. So lay it on me.
There's 2 questions in the chat already, and then we'll open it up to everyone. I'll just say them both and then you can answer them both. Is there any funding given to local districts for part-time enrollment students? And there's questions about what's the best way to talk to people about opposition to the vouchers? It seems difficult and complicated. Do you guys have sort of an elevator pitch or a way to explain it?
The part-time funding, I don't know. I did not read the bill before I brought it to your attention. I knew it was featured in, one of our newsletters, and I pulled a lot of this from our newsletters, but I will find out and get back to you. So you want to know if that part-time enrollment is funded, correct?
Yes.
I mean, yeah, great question. Tell me the second one again. Oh, about talking about vouchers?
Yeah, right. Just sort of how you simplify it for new folks new to the issue.
So we often talk about just accountability to taxpayers. My goodness, let's go back to this. So let's assume that you're talking to somebody that doesn't necessarily have a moral objection or philosophical objection to taxpayer money going to private school vouchers. Okay. Don't you want to know how your taxpayer money is doing? Public schools are certainly accountable to taxpayers, both through their boards of education, but also through all of the data that public schools and local school districts have to report to the state. Some of that is required by charter schools as well, or required of charter schools. But this piece of the vouchers in North Carolina, to me, is a no-brainer. I mean, if we're going to have them, if we're going to allow them, and if we're going to spend this kind of money, I mean, you're going into the billions of dollars invested in these private school vouchers. Shouldn't we know how that money is doing, what we're getting for that investment? So I would start there. I think that's important. That's a great question. And I'm not ashamed to admit I have such strong opinions, as does Public Schools First NC, with just the general idea of public dollars going to public goods where everyone had access. That's sort of our starting point, but again, let's assume you're talking to somebody that doesn't have a problem with that. How about accountability? I mean, that's a problem.
I have another point on the vouchers that you could use when explaining it to people. It really just gives rich people a discount for private schools, because no private school tuition, I don't think, is like less than $6,000. So somebody who is low income and getting the voucher is not going to be able to afford a private school unless it's a really sketchy private school.
Well,
no,
yes,
like,
no, and to your
rich
point,
people a discount.
no, yeah, no, that's very true, because the best performing high quality private schools are way more expensive than the voucher is going to make you eligible for. If you remember, I was talking about it's this one again, the one with the chart, but on the right hand side, when you look at the income level of folks that are making more than 200,000 and then more, they still get some of that money and they don't need it. And so it's like to your point, it's like a rebate, they're not sending their kid. There's a study, we've linked to it several times, and I'm sure they talk about it in that webinar. And I know we've talked about it in our newsletters. In fact, we highlighted it in one of our recent newsletters in the last couple months. There's a guy that has done a lot of research on other states that have voucher programs. And he found that most the vast majority of people that are taking advantage of the voucher never had their children in public school to start with. So they never needed the money. They were sending them to private school anyway on their own. And now, you know, getting access to a voucher. So it's kind of like a rebate or a supplement or however you want to, you know, use the term. And I'm sorry, I don't have that in front of me, but I can add that to the links that I'm going to send you. It's really compelling data. And I want to see, there's 23 comments, so I want to try to see some of these.
I think we got most of them. There was one question earlier on about whether or not private schools have to accept the vouchers. Like, are there private schools that don't accept vouchers?
I don't believe they do. I'll confirm that, but I'm almost positive they do not have to. No, because they don't have to take, you know, students that they might deem are challenging, or, you know, they can decide, you know, they don't have to accept you if they don't agree with your religious beliefs. They don't have to accept you, I mean, based on all kinds of, you know, criteria. So no, I don't believe they have to accept you because you need financial aid. I mean, that's their choice to make. Whether that financial aid is provided through them or through the voucher, no, I don't believe they have to.
And are there restrictions in using the money for religious schools?
Mm-mm. In fact, more than 90% of the voucher schools in North Carolina, meaning of all the private schools in North Carolina that accept private school vouchers, more than 90% of them are religious schools.
Wow.
There's very few that are not religious. The League of Women Voters is getting, that study is getting a little dated, but the League of Women Voters did a study, I think it was in 2019. It might have been in, I think it was 2019. It might have been a little bit earlier. But again, we linked to that study in our voucher fact sheet. But they looked at all of the schools receiving voucher money in North Carolina, and that was their finding. And it's not just us that links to it. A lot of, you know, it's been, that report has been featured in a lot of other reports and research.
I think another point when Jamie was asking the question about arguments against vouchers, I mean, are there not states, maybe like Arizona or places that have drastically expanded their voucher program and how much it's negatively impacting state budget? I mean, North Carolina is so proud right now of how balanced our budget is and what a, you know, an abundance of money we have and things. And it just seems like if that's the language folks speak, that this would be really a bad thing for that too. Is that correct?
Yes, that research does exist. And there are also examples. We just highlighted this, I think, in our most recent newsletter. And I should get to that. By the way, we do a newsletter once a week when the General Assembly is in session. But Texas and Idaho, I think, just beat back voucher expansion. And, you know, they did it largely, it was bipartisan, and a lot of Republican voters did not want it, and they beat it back successfully. You know, so in addition to the research that shows, you know, they don't provide better outcomes for children, and they hurt the state budget and they hurt investment in public schools. There's all kinds of research out there, you know, that just shows that they're not the way to go. I just remain just so discouraged and frustrated. You know, us at public schools as an organization, we're not moving on the needle about whether or not we support vouchers. We don't, period. But the fact that there's money sitting there that is unspent, a lot of money that is unspent, and we can't get them to even like take the surplus and give it back to traditional public schools, in addition to the rate of investment that they're adding to the voucher program and not funding public schools. You know, teacher raises that teachers have marched in the street for, the Leandro funding that, you know, is not being provided. That I can't, that's really frustrating. And that to me is enough to get upset about. If you don't want to, you know, necessarily fight the battle of whether or not we should have them in the first place. The lack of accountability and just the really obscene amount of money that we're putting into them is frustrating. I'm sorry, that probably didn't answer your question, but, or was longer than what you were looking for.
So it sounds like broadly, the state legislature is trying to grab a bunch of power from DPI and take decision-making authority away from the people who actually know education. Are you getting a lot of interest from, I mean, I think we have some districts that think, oh, our school board is all progressive, we're not being taken over by Moms for Liberty, like we're safe. Like, is this on their radar? Are they realizing that like the state could, with this equality bill that's not for equality, like dictate what they can teach to the kids? I mean, are people?
I would not, no, I would not, I would say that the general public is not aware, other than the stuff that grabs all the headlines, right? I know for a fact, I don't know if, well, I'm very confident that very few people in Wake County, and I say this as a school board member, have any clue that there's a 4th, 5th grade class size limit written into the House budget. And there's a lot of people, at least in, this happened all across the state, not just in Wake County, but there were people that with the K-3 class size mandate, it took a while for that to sort of get people's attention. And at that time, you know, there's always a lot going on with the General Assembly, but I would argue that with the K-3 class size, there wasn't as much to distract us. So that gained some traction right now with all the other stuff that is happening, like the, you know, the Bill of Rights, the equality in education, you know, these other culture war issues, or just the, you know, budget, that's not getting a lot of, attention. And people are busy, you know, if it doesn't, for many people, and this is not a criticism, you know, kitchen table issues, if it's not at your door, I mean, people are busy with their lives and their children and their jobs and their whatever, you know, they're busy. So it's hard to get attention on some of these issues. You asked me though, do school districts know? They should, you know, superintendents, school board members. Some of this should be on their radar. For example, the North Carolina School Boards Association, they've been very, vocal about House Bill 219, that charter omnibus bill, because it will have some major impact on local school district funding. So, but that's just the leadership piece in the public. It's really hard. And we spend a lot of time, as I told you, I was invited to speak about Senate bill, or the Parents' Bill of Rights bill, right? And I brought you all this other information. We try to highlight all these other things, you know, but we do what we can on social media and our newsletters, but it's just hard. It's hard to grab people's attention with so much going on. I'm sorry, that was another long-winded answer.
Do you have any suggestions for, ways to advocate, in opposition for these things? If we are fortunate to have representative who already stands in opposition to these things, we can certainly call and let that person know we are with them in that fight. But, and you've got your petition, but I mean, are there ways, to when, again, we're just speaking to the choir when we call our rep. So what else can we do that helps in some of those, I guess, just spreading the word to other districts that may have reps that are on the fence or whatever, but.
Yeah, because it's always more impactful for representatives to hear from their own constituents. But I really believe in the power of community, and I believe in everyone reaching those around you. A lot of you may have friends and neighbors and that say, well, I'm not political, but if you can talk about how this will impact their children, their life, impact them personally, telling stories, I think is very, very impactful. And each one reach one, in your own network, whether that's social media or at your church group, your civic group, your book club. I think having these conversations, really matters. And that in addition to taking these small actions like calling your lawmaker, newspapers are struggling, but I still think there's value in writing letters to the editor, or maybe submitting comment, like to WRAL or whatever. That the comment section in WRAL can get a little frustrating, but yeah, I think when we can get media attention, and that only comes when they see that public attention is focused on a particular issue, it helps to have the media raise awareness about these things. So, all right, I'm going to pass along. Okay. I invite all of you to Raleigh on May 31st. We are celebrating our 10th year as an organization, and we're having a reception. It is a ticketed event. Tickets are $50 for a general admission ticket, $20 for educators. So it is a fundraiser in honor of our 10th year. Congressman Wiley Nickel and Senator Rachel Hunt will be our speakers because they are very strong advocates of public schools and public education. And Congressman Nickel is new to Congress, and he'll bring us a message from DC, and Senator Hunt will speak about what's happening at the General Assembly. And I'm sure they will be much more inspirational than I am. So come and hear them speak. This is a really cool facility. It's one of our parks, Raleigh City Parks. It's a beautiful setting. So if you're able to come, I invite you to please come and join us. And then this is how you find us on social media. That's got our YouTube channel. I love to spotlight that because we do a lot of webinars. And again, as I said earlier, the one last week was specifically about charter schools. What was the one before that? I was so prepared to tell you, but there was one like a week, maybe 2 weeks earlier. They're pretty frequent, and you can find all of them are there. I'll just leave it at that. And we have really cool guests. We interviewed, we had Gene Nickel, who is well known for his work on behalf of, North Carolinians, our most vulnerable North Carolinians. he was a great guest. His webinar is on there. So many others. We did a conference last year that is featured. Oh gosh, it was actually 2021. It was more than a year ago. That where we had people from the Network for Public Education, which is Diane Ravich's group, and they spoke. So just a lot of really cool content on our YouTube channel. I do invite you to sign up for our news. Like I said, when the General Assembly is in session, we send that out once a week. You can find the archive newsletters as well as sign up for the newsletter on our website. We're on Instagram, Twitter, etc., Facebook. So find us, and Brittany's got my contact information. I'm happy to connect with you if anybody wants to follow up. And I thank you again for having me. And I will send you some links to a bunch of things, including these slides. If not tomorrow, soon.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you so much for all this great information. There's a lot of people thanking you and appreciating you in the chat. There's also a lot of people who express, frustration and anger and even depression over all of these bills. But I know it's reassuring for me to know that you and your organization are there all the time advocating and supporting our public school students. So we just want to appreciate you for that and for joining us tonight. Thank you everyone who tuned in, and more to come about what we can do to protect and preserve our public schools here in Chatham County. I'm going to stop recording and just thank